Imagine, imagine, if you will, standing on a really breathtaking stretch of Mediterranean coastline. Like, the water is that impossible, almost luminous shade of turquoise.
Oh yeah, the kind you usually only see in those heavily edited travel brochures.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
here, it is absolutely real. And the light
Wow.
has this, I don't know, this golden painter-obsessed quality to it.
Right, the classic Provence light.
Yeah, you are on the French Riviera.
Yeah.
And depending on which direction you walk right now, your reality is about to, like, fracture into two entirely different universes.
It really is two different worlds.
It is.
Yeah.
Because if you take a 10-minute stroll inland, you can walk up to a vendor, hand over exactly €3.50, and walk away with a piping hot, centuries-old local dish, arguably the best street food in all of France.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you turn around and walk down to the water's edge, you can rent a single, solitary beach chair for the day. And the cost of that chair,
Yeah.
€600.
Yeah? 600.
And that is before you have even ordered a glass of water.
Right, and that 600 euro gap isn't just, inflation or some random price gouging.
Right.
It's an intentionally engineered economic filter. Like, we are looking at a coastline that has figured out exactly how to segment humanity based on their willingness to pay for proximity to the water.
And that is exactly what we are pulling apart today. Welcome to our deep dive. We're looking at the 2026 reality of the Côte d'Azur, that legendary 115-kilometer stretch from Menton to the Estral coast.
It's a fascinating stretch of land.
It really is. And we've got a fantastic stack of source material today, anchored by the French Riviera. Is it worth it? 2026 travel guide.
Right, the one compiled by Phil and Age.
Yeah, exactly. It's compiled by this really interesting duo. Phil is this brutally blunt logistics and cost researcher, and H is an expert hyper-focused on, like, cultural authenticity and local systems.
They bring two very different but crucial perspectives.
They do. And what they have laid out is a blueprint of a region that is somehow simultaneously hosting a €70 a day backpacker and a €1,500 a day luxury traveler.
In the exact same zip code.
Right. So we are going to decode the underlying mechanics of how that actually works. And, more importantly, the strict, unwritten systems you absolutely must understand to survive this rapidly widening gap between the two.
Because the gap is definitely widening.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you see a €600 beach chair sharing a town with a €3.50 meal, something structural is happening beneath the surface.
Yeah, what is happening structurally is a massive shift in supply, demand, and municipal yield management. I mean, the Riviera essentially invented the concept of the luxury holiday back in the 19th century.
With the British aristocracy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for decades, it operated fairly passively. You showed up, you found a hotel, you went to the beach.
It was simple.
Right, but that era is over. The data for 2026 shows a destination that is actively managing the economics of every single visitor.
Like they're pulling the strings behind the curtain.
Exactly. And to understand why a mid-range traveler is suddenly feeling completely squeezed out, we really have to look at the sheer volume hitting this infrastructure.
The numbers are staggering.
They are. Nice Côte d'Azur Airport, which is the main entry point, handled 14.4 million passengers in 2024.
Wow.
Yeah. And as a region, they are absorbing 11 million tourists annually, plus up to 2 million cruise passengers at ports like Villefranche and Cannes.
I mean, you just cannot pour 13 million temporary residents onto a narrow 115-kilometer strip of land caught between the Alps and the sea without completely breaking the local housing and transport markets.
You really can't.
And according to the 2026 legislative shifts the guide talks about, what actually broke was the middle ground.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that local municipalities aren't trying to stop tourism. I mean, they completely rely on it.
Right, it's their lifeblood.
But they are using policy to dictate who gets to stay and for how much. Like, let's look at the mechanism behind the March 2026 restrictions on short-term rentals in Cannes.
The Airbnb bans.
Right. For years, the middle-class traveler relied on platforms like Airbnb to rent, a two-bedroom apartment for their family at a reasonable rate. But those short-term rentals basically hollowed out the local housing market. The yield curves for property owners heavily favored short-term tourists, lets over long-term leases for actual locals.
Which means the people who actually work in the restaurants, drive the trams, and clean the hotels could no longer afford to live in the city they were servicing. Which, to be clear, we're just reporting what the sources say here, not taking a stance on local housing politics, but the economic reality is.
Right, the city had to step in. So they introduced these strict caps and licensing requirements, forcing thousands of properties back onto the long-term residential market.
Which is obviously great for the local.
It's a necessary move for urban health, yeah. But the secondary effect is that the budget supply pool for tourists instantly shrank.
Oh, I see.
If you are a family of 4 who previously booked a €150 a night apartment, your options are now heavily reduced. You are pushed either into much more expensive traditional hotels, or you are pushed geographically outward to less desirable locations.
So it creates this sort of bimodal distribution. Like you either play the extreme budget game or you pay the extreme luxury premium. The middle tier is intentionally being squeezed out.
Intentionally squeezed, exactly.
I was looking at these numbers and thinking, the Riviera is operating like a video game. But instead of just experiencing it, you are locked into an economic algorithm. You're like walking the same streets, looking at the exact same Mediterranean sunset, but your financial reality is completely partitioned. It's like 2 completely separate difficulty settings operating on the exact same map.
That is a great way to put it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who is trying to plan a trip right now?
It means that the budget to luxury price gap on the Riviera in 2026 is structurally the widest in Western Europe.
Wild.
Let's look at the operational reality of the 2 extremes. On the low end, you have the backpacker. The foundational public elements of the region have actually remained fiercely protected.
Thank goodness.
Right, like the public beach is free, the local markets are subsidized. If that traveler utilizes the regional train network, buys produce at the Cours Saleya market, and stays in a hostel, their daily spend is €70.
€70. In 2026,
Yeah.
that is less than it costs to exist on a random Tuesday in London or New York.
Yeah.
And they are actively participating in the culture, fully immersed, for a completely accessible price.
Absolutely. But then you look at the other end of the algorithm.
Right, yeah.
The luxury traveler is operating in a completely different supply chain. They check into a palace hotel like the Negresco, they dine on Alain Ducasse tasting menus, and book private beach clubs.
The €600 chairs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their daily spend is between €1,500 and €2,500.
Wow.
And this tier is insulated from the housing squeeze because palace hotels operate on fixed real estate with dedicated seasonal labor forces. They often even house their own staff to ensure service continuity.
So the gap between €70 and €2,500 isn't a fluke.
No, it's the result of a highly segmented market where you must actively choose your lane for every single transaction.
Which brings us to the ultimate lever of control in this economy. If the physical space is fixed, the only variable left is time. And on the Riviera, time dictates everything. Your entire financial reality is governed by the calendar.
It really is.
I mean, this region gets 300 days of sunshine a year. In August, the Mediterranean is hitting 26 degrees Celsius. Even in October, you've got 20-degree water.
Which is beautiful.
But because the global demand for that specific climate is so intense, the pricing acts like a heart monitor, just flatlining in winter and spiking violently in the spring and summer.
And that volatility creates what Phil and H identify as Trap 1 in their guide, the May calendar collision.
Yes.
This is a brilliant example of macro logistics completely overriding individual consumer planning.
Let me set up this trap because it is so easy to fall into. You are a traveler looking for a late spring getaway. You think, oh, I'll go in May, the weather is warming up, but it's before the August school holidays.
Seems logical.
Right. You have no interest in cars, and you have no interest in cinema. You just book a mid-range hotel in Nice for the final week of May. What you don't realize is that you have just baked yourself into the single most expensive, highly pressured fortnight on the European calendar.
Because you are colliding with the Cannes Film Festival running May 13th to the 24th, and the Monaco Formula One Grand Prix running May 22nd to the 25th.
It's just a perfect storm.
We have the 2 most wealth-concentrated global events overlapping on the same 115-kilometer stretch of road.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because I understand that Cannes and Monaco would be expensive. But here's where my mind gets stuck. If I'm just staying in Nice, which is roughly in the middle, why does it matter?
Wow.
Like, why am I suddenly paying €600 for a room that cost $160 just 2 weeks prior? If I don't go to the track or the red carpet, shouldn't my localized economy be fine? Can't a traveler just stay in Nice and ignore the events?
That assumes Nice operates in a vacuum, which it absolutely doesn't. You have to think of the entire Riviera as a single airplane cabin. Once the first-class seats in Monaco and Cannes are completely sold out, which happens often a year in advance, The booking algorithms automatically recognize a massive supply shortage.
Ah, right.
The demand overflows into Nice. Corporate sponsors, media teams, peripheral event staff, and tourists who couldn't afford Monaco all descend on Nice. The algorithm automatically quadruples the price of the economy seats in Nice to match the surging regional demand.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's just an algorithmic cascade.
Yeah.
But it can't just be the hotel prices that break under that pressure. What happens to the actual physical infrastructure of the region?
Oh, it buckles. Think about the supply chain required to support those two elements simultaneously. A restaurant in Cannes serving VIPs during the festival requires triple its normal daily delivery of fresh seafood, premium wines, and linens.
All on the same roads.
At the exact same time, the roads are facing massive closures for the Grand Prix. The A8 motorway, the main artery connecting these towns, becomes paralyzed.
Sounds like a nightmare.
The regional trains are packed with commuters trying to bypass the road traffic. If you are that tourist who just wanted a quiet week in Nice, you are suddenly competing for basic resources: a table at a restaurant, a seat on a train, a taxi from the airport, with a massive, hyper-funded temporary population.
It sounds less like a vacation and more like trying to relax in the middle of a corporate merger.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
So the actionable advice here is stark. Treat May as a 2-window month. Go before the 12th or after the 26th. If you go in between, you better have a corporate expense account.
Precisely.
And it creates such a sharp contrast with the rest of the year. July and August are maximum capacity, pure density, but then the source material highlights October. They call it the hidden month. And honestly, the underlying math of October makes it sound like the smartest time to go.
October represents the highest value yield on the Riviera calendar. Let's look at the physical properties of the Mediterranean Sea. Water has a high specific heat capacity, right? It takes all summer to warm up, and it retains that heat well into the autumn. So in October, the air temperature might drop to a comfortable 22 degrees, but the water is still holding at 20 or 21 degrees.
Wow.
You get summer swimming conditions without the summer humidity.
And more importantly, you get a 40 to 50% drop in hotel rates.
Exactly. Because the European school holidays are over, the massive domestic tourist market evaporates. The supply of hotel rooms suddenly vastly outstrips demand, and the algorithmic pricing drops back to baseline.
Makes sense.
Phil notes that this is when the region is finally honest about what it is: a place of tremendous geographical beauty rather than a frantic stage set for high-season wealth performance.
The stage set for wealth performance, that's
Yeah.
just a perfect way to describe the peak season. But let's say you've navigated the calendar, you've picked your month. The next critical lever you have to pull is geography.
Location, location, location.
Exactly. Where exactly do you put your suitcase down? Because this coastline is not homogeneous. It is a highly distinct series of zones. The guide maps out 4 primary base camps: Nice, Cannes, Monaco, and the Antibes-Les Pins area.
And choosing your base camp dictates your daily logistical overhead. It is arguably the most important structural decision of the trip.
Right. Let's start with Nice.
From an urban planning and infrastructure perspective, Nice is the ultimate hub. It is the only city on the Riviera with the scale to support all traveler brackets. It has the international airport, the central nexus for the regional rail network, and a diverse housing and hotel market that, outside of May and August, functions somewhat normally.
So it's the safest bet.
Unless you have a hyper-specific reason to be elsewhere, Nice is the mathematically optimal base.
Then you look at Cannes, which is much more focused on high-end retail and private beach concessions, like beautiful for a day trip but punitively expensive as a week-long base.
Very expensive.
And Monaco is completely disconnected from standard European pricing reality. It is a microstate built on tax exile wealth, meaning its hotels operate on a completely different pricing paradigm.
Yeah, Monaco is in its own universe.
But then there is the fourth option, Antibes. The guide highlights this as a highly strategic alternative.
Antibes sits geographically between Nice and Cannes, and it offers a very specific geological advantage: sand.
Right.
Nice, as we'll discuss later, is a pebble beach. Antibes offers natural sandy coves. For a family whose primary operational goal is letting children play near the water without requiring expensive rented sunbeds, Antibes instantly lowers the daily expenditure.
The irony, though, of choosing a slightly cheaper or more family-friendly base camp like Antibes is that you risk surrendering all your savings to transportation costs.
That's the catch.
Like if you want to see Monaco or dine in Nice, how do you move between them? And this is where the guide introduces what I think is the most vital piece of knowledge for the entire region: the transport mechanics.
The logistics of movement are key.
When you land at Nice airport, you have options. A fixed-rate taxi to the city center is roughly 32 euros during the day. An Uber might be 25 euros, but it sits in the exact same coastal traffic. But the optimal choice is Tramline 2.
Oh, Tramline 2 is a masterpiece of municipal infrastructure. For €1.70, you board right outside the terminal, and it runs on a dedicated, traffic-separated line straight into the commercial heart of Nice in just 25 minutes.
It is brilliant, but the real travel cheat code, the thing that entirely subverts the idea that the Riviera is only an elite playground, is the TIR regional train network.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the TIR train network is the great equalizer of the Côte d'Azur. The TIR Transport Express Regional is heavily subsidized by the French state and the regional government.
Wait, let's pause there for a second. Why does the French government subsidize a train line that runs along some of the most expensive coastal real estate in the world? Aren't they effectively just handing tourists a hyper-cheap way to travel?
Well, because the local economy would completely collapse without it. Remember the housing squeeze we discussed earlier?
Right, the short-term rentals pushing locals out.
Yes. The service workers, the nurses, the teachers, the hospitality staff, they largely cannot afford to live in Monaco, Cannes, or the center of Nice. The state subsidizes the TIR network so that the local workforce can physically commute to the luxury centers to keep the economy running.
Oh, wow.
The tourist simply gets to take advantage of this subsidized commuter infrastructure.
That is fascinating. It's basically a subsidized loophole. And the cost-to-scenery ratio is just absurd.
It's beautiful.
The track literally hugs the cliffs above the Mediterranean. You can get from Nice to Monaco in 22 minutes for €3.80. You can go to Cannes for €6.80. You're looking out the window at multi-million-euro cliffside villas, experiencing the exact same view as someone in a private helicopter, and you paid less than the cost of an espresso.
Yeah.
It completely democratizes the geography.
It really acts as a temporal and financial wormhole. You sleep in a €70 a night localized setup in Nice, use the state-subsidized train to bypass the traffic and the luxury gatekeepers, step out into the absolute center of Monaco, walk the harbor, and then warp back to your budget base camp.
And there's also Bus 100, which runs along the lower Corniche Road for €1.70. It takes longer, about 45 minutes, but Phil calls it the most scenic bus route in France.
It's stunning.
Imagine booking a €300 private black car transfer, only to find yourself stuck in single-lane traffic directly behind a public bus where everyone paid €1.70 for the exact same view. It's the ultimate validation of being informed.
Absolutely.
But once you have mastered the trains and you are wandering through these towns, you have to navigate the local food systems. And here, the economic divide is just as sharp.
Oh, the food divide is massive. The French Riviera essentially operates two entirely parallel food supply chains. The price discrepancy between the two is staggering, and it is entirely based on your proximity to the water.
Let's talk about the first one.
The first system is deeply rooted in the local Niçois tradition. Historically, the county of Nice was part of the Kingdom of Sardinia and only officially became French in 1860.
Right.
Because of that, Niçois cuisine is essentially a hybrid. It relies heavily on Ligurian Italian influence, utilizing olive oil, chickpeas, anchovies, and fresh local produce, rather than the heavy butter and cream of classical French cooking.
And the absolute heart of that local system is Socca. The guide paints this incredible picture. You get off the tram, walk 6 minutes into the Cours Saleya market, surrounded by these vibrant yellow and ochre Baroque buildings, and you find a vendor like Chez Pipo.
A classic spot.
They have these massive open wood fires and huge heavy iron skillets. They pour in a batter of just chickpea flour, water, olive oil, and black pepper. They bake it until the edges are charred and crispy, slide it onto a piece of paper, and hand it to you for about €3.50.
So good.
It's communal, it's historic, and it is a complete circumvention of the luxury dining scene.
It is the ultimate ground-level Riviera experience. You also have the pan bagnat, which is essentially a traditional salade niçoise packed inside a large, hollowed-out, olive oil-soaked bread roll. It's sold for around €5 to €7.
Amazing.
And the salade niçoise itself is actually the perfect lens through which to view these two parallel food systems.
Yes. The strict rules of the salad. I found this fascinating because locals are fiercely defensive of it.
Oh, they do not mess around with the salad.
Yeah.
An authentic salade niçoise, which you will find in a local Old Town brasserie for maybe €12 to €16, adheres to rigid historical constraints. Absolutely no cooked vegetables, no lettuce, and no boiled potatoes.
Wait, really? No lettuce at all?
None. It is a raw salad. Tomatoes, radishes, local olives, anchovies or tuna, and hard-boiled eggs. It is a reflection of the hot climate and the historical poverty of the region, where cooking vegetables over a fire used precious, expensive fuel.
But then you walk 400 meters south. You cross from the old town onto the Promenade des Anglais, the main strip facing the sea, and you enter the second food system, tourist economy.
And the entire paradigm shifts. On the Promenade or on La Croisette in Cannes, restaurants are dealing with astronomical commercial rent. To cover that overhead, a dinner service ranges from 50 to 150 euros per person.
Incredible.
And that salade niçoise. It suddenly costs 24 to 28 euros. More importantly, the recipe fundamentally changes. It is bulked up with cheap, heavy ingredients like boiled potatoes, cooked green beans, and massive beds of lettuce. All the things the traditional recipe explicitly forbids.
Right, they modify it to appease a generic tourist palate that conflates sheer volume with value. Phil points out the mathematics of his trap beautifully. Any restaurant physically facing the Mediterranean applies a 40 to 60% location premium over an equivalent restaurant just 2 blocks inland.
Exactly.
If a meal costs 35 euros in the Old Town, it costs 60 euros on the Promenade. You are paying a 25 euro view tax every single time you sit down.
It is the literal monetization of the horizon. You are paying for the real estate, not the culinary execution. So the structural advice is absolute. Eat inland, drink on the coast.
That is a great rule of thumb. But whether you are buying a 3 euro slice of onion tart in the market or sitting down for a 100 euro dinner overlooking the super yachts, there is one universal, non-negotiable rule of engagement that applies across every tier of this economy. It is the social requirement of the word bonjour.
This is perhaps the most critical cultural mechanism in the entire guide. If you walk into a French establishment and you do not initiate the interaction with bonjour or bonsoir in the evening, you are committing a significant social breach.
I struggle with this a bit, honestly.
How so?
Well, from an American or British service perspective, the customer is generally leading the interaction. If I walk into a bakery, smile warmly, point at a beautifully flaky croissant and say, "1 croissant, please," I'm not trying to be rude, I'm just being efficient. Why is that considered genuinely offensive in southern France?
To understand that, you really have to look at the history of French labor and egalitarianism. It traces back to the post-revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity. In the Anglo-American model, the service worker is often structurally subservient to the customer, right? The transaction is the priority. In the French model, equality fraternity must be established before commerce can occur.
Oh, I see.
When you walk in and immediately demand a croissant, you are basically treating the person behind the counter as a vending machine. You are erasing their humanity and reducing them to their economic function.
Wow. So by saying bonjour, madame, or bonjour, monsieur, you are essentially saying, I acknowledge that we are two equal human beings sharing a space.
Precisely. You pause the commerce to establish the humanity. Once that mutual respect is established, the transaction can proceed. Phil and H emphasize that your service experience on the Riviera will scale in direct proportion to your use of this single word.
That's a huge tip.
Even if the very next thing you say is terrible, broken French, the fact that you respected the egalitarian protocol completely alters the energy of the encounter. It is the highest yield investment you can make on your trip.
It just reframes the entire concept of customer service. It's not linguistic gatekeeping, it's about labor dignity. And considering that these workers are dealing with millions of tourists demanding things in a dozen different languages every summer, taking 2 seconds to establish that baseline respect is really the absolute minimum we can do.
Absolutely.
But that etiquette of transaction segues us perfectly into the literal financial transactions that often blindside visitors. Because once you've navigated the bakery with a polite bonjour, you might decide you want to spend the day at the beach.
Right, the beach.
And this is where the Riviera deploys its most sophisticated economic models. The guide calls this Trap 2, the beach club minimum spend.
It is a masterful piece of revenue extraction, and it operates entirely on mismatched consumer expectations.
Let me break down how this presents itself to a tourist. You walk down to a private beach club in Nice. You see a sign that says some beds are 60 to 80 euros for the day. In Cannes, maybe it says 150 to 200 euros. At the extreme end, like Monaco, you might see 400 euros. Yeah, and the average traveler looks at that and thinks, okay, that is an exorbitant rental fee for a piece of canvas and an umbrella. But it's my vacation. I want the luxury experience. I'll pay the 80 euro rental fee.
But it's not a rental fee.
It's not, no.
What you are actually signing, often unknowingly, is a minimum spend contract. The €80 is not the cost of the real estate. It is a baseline consumption quota that you are legally bound to meet through their specific food and beverage menu.
It's like walking into a movie theater where they tell you the seat is totally free, but the moment you sit down, you are legally bound by contract to buy $150 worth of popcorn and soda before the movie ends. Why does the industry operate this way, instead of just charging a flat, transparent rental fee?
Well, this raises an important question about how transparent the luxury tourism industry really is. But we have to analyze this neutrally as a business model. A private beach club operator in France doesn't actually own the beach. The coastline is heavily protected by state maritime law. The operator is granted a temporary concession license by the municipality. That license is incredibly expensive. Furthermore, the operator has to physically build the club structure in the spring, pay high seasonal labor wages, and completely dismantle the structure in the winter to return the beach to its natural state.
That's a lot of overhead.
Exactly. They have a 4 to 5 month operational window to cover massive structural costs and generate a year's profit. A flat €80 rental fee simply doesn't cover their margins. They need you to consume high-margin items like €25 glasses of rosé and €45 salads.
So the minimum spend is economically necessary for their survival.
Yeah.
But the lived reality for the uninformed tourist is brutal. Imagine a couple showing up at a mid-tier con club at 11 a.m. in August. They think they spent €150 total for 2 beds. By 4 p.m., the waiter informs them they still have a €100 deficit on their minimum spend.
Oh, that happens all the time.
They're forced to order bottles of wine they didn't really want just to hit the quota. They leave feeling financially hostage.
Which creates a stark contrast with the ultimate local hack: utilizing the public beach.
The great equalizer.
French maritime law guarantees public access to the shoreline. In Nice, the public, completely free sections of the beach sit directly adjacent to the private concessions. You can walk to a Monoprix supermarket, buy a €1.20 fresh baguette, a €5 bottle of local AOC rosé and appellation d'origine contrôlée, guaranteeing it was produced in the specific regional terroir, and sit on the exact same beach.
That's amazing.
You are literally feet away from the person sweating over their €400 minimum spend, looking at the exact same water for the cost of pocket change.
The self-confidence to lie on a €10 towel next to someone paying a fortune, that is the real luxury.
It really is.
But the hidden costs of the Riviera don't end at the beach.
Sure.
When you finally pack up your towel and go back to your hotel to check out, you run into Trap 3. And this one is driven directly by the new 2026 legislation we discussed earlier, the tiered tourist tax, or taxe séjour.
Right, the tourist tax. This is a structural municipal charge applied per person per night, scaled precisely to the official star rating of your accommodation. In 2026, the Nice Metropole updated these rates significantly.
How much are we talking?
A 2-star hotel or an unclassified rental charges €1.65 per person per night. A 4-star hotel charges €3.48. And if you are staying in a 5-star palace hotel, the tax is €6.43 per person per night.
Now, hearing €6 doesn't sound like a massive trap, but let's do the math on a typical trip. You have a family of 4 staying in a 4-star hotel for a week. At checkout, they are hit with nearly €100 in local taxes. If a couple is at a palace hotel for 10 days, that's almost €130. But the real issue isn't the tax itself, it's how it is presented to the consumer during the booking process. Why do so many tourists feel blindsided by this?
Because of the technical architecture of third-party booking platforms. To remain competitive on the initial search results page, platforms often display the base room rate and obscure local municipal taxes until the absolute final click of checkout. Sometimes they don't process it at all, leaving the hotel to collect it manually at the front desk. To the consumer, it feels like a dishonest last-minute penalty. But if we analyze the mechanics of this tax, it is actually a vital closed-loop system.
How so?
Where does that €6.43 a night go? It goes directly to the municipality to fund the heavy infrastructure required to process 11 million tourists. It pays for the extra garbage collection, the public beach maintenance, and crucially, it subsidizes that €1.70 tram we love so much.
Ah, I see.
In a way, it is a localized wealth transfer. The luxury traveler paying the €6 palace tax is helping to fund the infrastructure that the budget backpacker relies on to survive.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. It's a symbiotic relationship. But all of this, the taxes, the minimum spends, the view tax on the promenade, it forces a very difficult question. When you strip away the decades of marketing, does the actual physical reality of the Riviera match the high-priced fantasy? The guide dedicates a whole section to what they call honest disappointments, and some of these require a major mental recalibration.
Yeah, the marketing apparatus of the Côte d'Azur is extraordinarily powerful. It sells an imagery of soft golden sands, effortless cinematic glamour, and uncrowded elegance. The physical reality is often quite different, and the most immediate shock for visitors is the very ground they walk on in Nice.
The beach. You are telling me that the most famous, heavily photographed legendary beach in France is entirely made of rocks.
It is made of galets, large, rounded, uneven Mediterranean stones smoothed over millennia by the Var River and the sea. When you see aerial drone footage of the Promenade des Anglais, the distance smooths out the shoreline, making it look inviting.
Right.
But the physical reality of walking barefoot to the water is a painful, wobbly exercise. Sitting on a thin towel is physically uncomfortable. To actually lie down and relax, you have to adapt, either by wearing specialized water shoes and buying a thick padded mat from a vendor for 15 euros, or by paying for one of those private beach clubs just to access a mattress.
I can just imagine an American tourist who has watched James Bond movies and Grace Kelly films their whole life, arriving in Nice, dropping their bags, running down to the legendary beach, and nearly breaking an ankle on a boulder.
It happens every day.
If your entire vacation strategy was based on lying comfortably on the sand with a book, you're going to be deeply disappointed, which perfectly explains why the guide so strongly recommends Antibes if sand is a non-negotiable requirement for your trip. And speaking of James Bond, the guide issues a massive reality check regarding Monaco.
Monaco is a fascinating study in expectation versus reality. Visitors arrive expecting an uninterrupted tapestry of wealth, sprawling casinos, and cinematic ease. And while the wealth is undeniably concentrated there, the actual physical environment is essentially a highly dense, extremely vertical urban environment.
It's tiny, right?
It is constrained to just 2 square kilometers. The reality is heavy traffic and towering high-rise residential blocks built directly into the cliffside. First-time visitors really require recalibration.
It's basically a vertical vault for tax exiles.
Yes. The super yachts in Port Hercules are extraordinary, and the casino square is historically beautiful, but the overall atmosphere is not one of a relaxed coastal paradise. It is a highly secure, somewhat claustrophobic stage set. Phil's logistical verdict is quite blunt. It is absolutely worth seeing, but give it half a day, take your photos, and utilize the Terre train to get back to Nice for a far better, more authentic dinner.
And since we're discussing the physical reality of the cities, we have to talk about safety and security. The guide is very objective about this. Day-to-day safety is high. Violent crime against tourists is incredibly rare.
Very rare, yeah.
The primary threat is property crime, like pickpockets at the Cours Saleya market, bag snatching at the train stations, or theft on the crowded beaches in August when you leave your bag to swim. But there is a much deeper layer to the physical environment of Nice that first-time visitors will immediately notice, and it requires historical context.
Any comprehensive guide to Nice must address the permanent security infrastructure. Following the Bastille Day attack on the Promenade des Anglais in 2016, the city fundamentally altered its urban planning. Today, as you walk the 7-kilometer stretch of the promenade, you are constantly interacting with permanent, heavy vehicle exclusion barriers, integrated bollards, and a highly visible, sustained presence of armed military and police patrols.
For a first-time visitor expecting a carefree holiday, seeing military patrols with rifles walking past sunbathers can be very jarring. It might instinctively make them think, wait, is there an active threat right now?
And that is a crucial psychological misconception the guide corrects. That infrastructure is not an indicator of imminent elevated danger. It is the visible integration of historical trauma into the modern resilience of the city.
That makes a lot of sense.
Once you understand the mechanism that the city heavily invested in this infrastructure to ensure the promenade remains a permanently safe pedestrian zone, the barriers stop feeling intimidating and instead become deeply reassuring. In fact, precisely because of this dense security network, Nice rates exceptionally well for solo travelers, particularly solo females. The Old Town is well lit, the public transport is highly monitored, and the overall environment is structurally secure.
So we've covered the stones on the beach, the extreme density with up to 100,000 pedestrians on the promenade in August, and the complex economic models. What if a listener absorbs all of this and thinks, you know what, I want the Mediterranean water, I want the food, but I absolutely refuse to engage with the 2026 Riviera hypereconomy? Do they have alternatives?
The guide offers 2 excellent alternatives that provide the aesthetic without the economic strain. The first is Collioure, located down in the Languedoc-Roussillon region near the Spanish border. It's about 3.5 hours away by train. It is a stunning, deeply historic coastal town with a 13th century chateau right on the water. It features sandy beaches and a strong Catalan culinary influence. Historically, it is where Matisse and Derain birthed the Fauvist art movement because the light is so unique.
That sounds idyllic. Why wouldn't someone just go there instead?
It comes down to macroeconomics and infrastructure. In Collier, mid-range accommodation might run 90 to 140 euros a night in peak season, compared to 250 to 450 in Nice. However, you sacrifice the scale of infrastructure. You do not have the massive international airport connectivity, you don't have the high-density, multi-tiered gastronomy scene, and you lack the regional rail network that allows you to cross international borders for a day trip.
Which perfectly sets up alternative number 2, San Remo, Italy. This is a brilliant logistical hack. San Remo is only 45 minutes away from Nice on that exact same TE or regional train.
So close.
You simply ride the train east, cross the border into the Italian region of Liguria, and step out into what is essentially the Italian mirror image of Nice. It has the Belle Epoque Casino, the Palm Line Promenade, the historic Old Town. But because you are operating in a different national macroeconomic environment, the pricing structure is entirely different.
Italy's coastal tax structures and regional economic baselines differ significantly from the French Riviera. Across the board, from hotel rates to restaurant bills to beach club access, San Remo is 30 to 40% cheaper. And crucially, the beaches there are actual sand.
That's a huge selling point.
The guide notes that you can literally base yourself in Nice, take a 20 euro round-trip train ride to San Remo for the day, eat superior, cheaper Italian food, lie on a sandy beach, and be back in France for sunset.
It's the ultimate geographical arbitrage. But as we pull all these threads together, the geography, the transport hacks, the hidden taxes, the unwritten social rules of the bakery, the pebbles, and the parallel food universes, we have to answer the ultimate question posed by Phil and H's 2026 guide. After all the crowds, the logistical hurdles, and the costs, is the French Riviera actually worth it?
The central thesis of their conclusion rests entirely on intentionality. The Riviera is an environment that severely, almost ruthlessly, punishes the unprepared traveler.
Right.
If you fall into the May collision trap, if you pay the 25 euro hue tax for a terrible salad on the promenade, if you blindly accept a 200 euro beach club minimum spend without understanding the contract, you will leave feeling exploited. But the region disproportionately rewards the informed traveler who understands how the local systems operate.
Let's run through their final verdict matrix. For the 70 euro a day backpacker, is it worth it?
Yes, absolutely. If they hack the local Niçois food system, utilize the subsidized terre trains, leverage the free public beaches, and travel outside of August, they will experience one of Europe's most historically rich coastlines for the price of staying home.
What about the mid-range couple? The ones budgeting around 325 euros a day total.
It is a conditional yes. It is highly rewarding, provided they execute precise calendar management. They must travel in the shoulder months of June or September, and they must book their accommodation in Venice 6 to 8 weeks in advance to avoid algorithmic price surges. For families, it is also a conditional yes, but primarily if they base themselves in Antibes for the sand, completely avoiding the chaotic energy and rocky beaches of Nice in high summer.
And the luxury traveler, the one dropping 1,500 euros a day or more.
Even at the highest tier, Phil and H say yes, but only if they exercise investment literacy. The Riviera will gladly take thousands of euros a day from you and deliver a mediocre, generic experience if you spend it in the wrong places. But if that traveler balances high-end indulgence, like a stay at the Negresco and a private boat charter, with an authentic 40 euro dinner at a respected Old Town institution, the destination delivers an unparalleled, world-class return on investment.
And finally, the digital nomads. At 2,800 to 3,600 euros a month, it is astronomically expensive compared to hubs in Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe. But the guide concludes, yes, the sheer quality of life, the Mediterranean climate, and the rail connectivity to the rest of Europe make it structurally viable and deeply compelling for mid to high earners.
Ultimately, the 2026 Riviera is whatever you intentionally engineer it to be.
And I find that incredibly thrilling. The idea that a destination so globally associated with exclusive, untouchable wealth can still be thoroughly conquered and completely hacked by a smart, informed traveler armed with nothing but a €1.70 tram ticket, an understanding of municipal economics, and a taste for hot chickpea pancakes. It proves that travel is still fundamentally about knowledge, not just budget.
It is a testament to the resilience of the local systems that continue to operate just beneath the surface of the luxury tourism machine.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one final lingering thought that really stuck with me after reading this 2026 data. The entire economic model of the Riviera, the beach concessions, the algorithmic hotel pricing, the density relies on squeezing maximum profit out of that glorious summer peak. It all hinges on the Mediterranean hitting that perfect 26 degrees Celsius in August.
That's the engine of the whole region.
But what happens as climate change pushes that baseline temperature even higher? When August on the Mediterranean becomes physically unbearable rather than just crowded, will this massive multi-million euro luxury economy eventually be forced to abandon the summer entirely? Will Phil's hidden month of October become the new, hyper-expensive peak season of the future?
It is the defining macroeconomic and existential question for the entire Mediterranean basin over the next decade. If the climate permanently shifts the demand calendar, the entire economic foundation of the Côte d'Azur, from the beach club licenses to the hotel yield curves, will have to be completely rebuilt.
Something to mull over as you plan your trip, because whether you are navigating the future of global climate shifts or just trying to navigate the painful pebbles on the beach, the reality remains. You are standing on the edge of the Mediterranean, and the choice is entirely yours, a €3.50 Socca or a €600 chair. That is the honest reality of the Riviera. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.